Hello, I'm Caroline Cabrera, Director of Education for Miami. The Greenhouse Teachers Lab is brought to you by Miami. These modules aim to provide teachers with creative writing strategies supported by a trauma-informed lens. Through projects, events, and publishing, we create a platform for amplifying Miami's people, investing in a new shared narrative of our city and a more equitable picture of its future. We believe that art and self-expression should be equally available to every Miamian. In this module, poet, playwright, director, and educator Darius, Daughtry, and board-certified art therapist Deanna, Barton, walk teachers through a curriculum focused on dealing with grief and loss in the classroom, particularly in the context of gun violence and school shootings.
Hi, Darius.
Hey, Deanna, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Are you ready?
I'm ready if you're ready.
I am always ready. Are you ready? Okay, so the lesson today we're going to talk about is words in bloom. Now, this particular module is inspired by More Than What Happened, which is an anthology that is edited by Nadej Green and published by Miami. And the culminating activity was called Words in Bloom. Now, this anthology was a chance for Miamians to express their experiences with gun violence.
So I'm really excited that we get an opportunity to share this activity with teachers, but maybe before we jump into that, we can just kind of give a brief overview of some outcomes or benefits of the Words in Bloom activity.
Absolutely.
All right, so the first thing that comes to mind for me is how Words in Bloom creatively and gently invite students to explore the feelings that come up around community violence and gun violence in particular. So this is a way for them to express and also normalize feelings like fear, anxiety, and potentially grief. We should also point out that many of our students are affected by gun violence, whether that's directly or indirectly, due to the increase of school shootings and also their exposure to the replays through the media and also social media.
And because of that, because of the increase of exposure, it's important that students and young people feel a sense of community during these times. And when they need to feel resilience through the healing process, what better way to do that? Especially when you talk about a traumatic experience, like gun violence, whether it's indirect or direct, what better way to do that than through creative expression? I
agree. And so when we think about that trauma-informed approach, Words in Bloom really brings together what you've already learned in several other modules about bottom-up techniques and top-down techniques. So we're really inviting our students to go through a process of centering, grounding, sensing, feeling, and then moving into the expressive arts using writing and visual arts as a way to further explore, express, and process some really traumatic things. All right, so how about we share with the teachers the actual steps for the activity?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So the first thing that we invite you to do with your students is to ground them. And I know that you've heard this several times in other modules, but we feel that it's really important for this module in particular because we are talking about such a heavy and challenging topic. So you're invited to use any grounding exercise that's already familiar to you in your classroom. You can use one of the grounding exercises that's been shared in other modules. And we've also included a recorded guided visualization that you can use to help your students calm and relax their nervous system before you get started. I also remember that in our culminating workshop, there was an art therapist present who used sound bowls and breath work as a way to calm and ground the participants. So if music or sound bowls is something that you would like to incorporate as part of the grounding, you can research and find some audio of sound bowls through your favorite music streaming service.
Yeah, and when we did that grounding experience with the sound bowls, I know it got me in a place to be able to create, and it got the participants as well to do the best part ever, which is the creation, which is the writing, right? So that's what we're gonna do right now, all right? So with your students, we're gonna start with just a thought generation exercise. And that's just a simple exercise where they all can participate in this. And that's just them making lists and just jotting down their thoughts, right? And it isn't about them trying to write a poem just yet, right? So the first part is just we're gonna ask them, when they think about gun violence, what emotions come up for them? Fear, anger, sadness. Whatever they are, they can just jot those down on a sheet of paper or wherever and just let them be, right? Very low bar for entry. We can all do that, all right? Once we have generated that list, then we go ahead and we're gonna make some associations. Now, when we think of those emotions, whether it's fear, sadness, what are the people, places, sounds, and colors that we actually think about? So ask your students to list, when they think of sadness in relation to gun violence, what are the people, places, sounds, and colors that come up for them? And do that for each one, right? Once we've generated those lists and made those connections, then we get to travel. Now, we did the culminating activity for Words in Bloom in an actual garden. Now, you may be able to take your students to a garden, or you can take them to any outside place. Maybe there isn't a garden at your school, but maybe there's an outside place that you can go and just be out in the world. If you can't do that, we can travel in our minds. We can sit there, because we've already learned these grounding and meditation practices, and just take a trip in our minds to a garden. Either way, think about what is there. The sounds, the colors, animals, whatever is there. And anything that the student can think of or actually see or hear, we're gonna make a list. We're gonna list those things. Now this is fun. We can jot as many things down as possible. Once we've done that, now we're gonna take the ideas that we generated at the beginning with our emotions and those connections that we made. And then we're gonna take that to the garden, or we're gonna bring the garden to the classroom or to your neighborhood. And we're gonna see how those things relate and how you can talk about your emotions and your feelings in terms of gun violence, but through the language of the garden, right? So here's an opportunity for your students to be as creative as they possibly can. It doesn't have to be a certain length. They can rhyme or not. They can use metaphors or not, but the idea is for them to paint the picture as vividly as possible in this space. You know, because this is their opportunity to be open and expressive, right? Because that's how we get better. That's how we get over, and that's how we share in this communal experience. And you know, I always think about June Jordan, famed poet, and she says that poetry is a political act because it involves telling the truth. And when you talk about gun violence or anything that's traumatic, if you're able to have permission to tell the truth, that's how progress occurs. And if we are in the same space and your students are given this permission to be honest and open and vulnerable, then that's how not only individual progress is made, but this universal and communal progress.
Yes, I imagine there's a lot of beautiful writing and poetry and strong language that can come out of this portion of the activity.
Yes.
And I think it's also important to note the power of the garden. I heard you mention kind of this connectivity between people and building that community. So when we think about a garden, there's not just one plant, there's not just one flower. And so using that metaphor of the garden to connect back to the community and their experiences with gun violence, and understanding that nature provides us with so many metaphors about life, a lifespan, you know, birth to death, and how this is a very natural process. Not always an enjoyable process, but one that touches all of our lives in some way.
Right.
And also recognizing that florals and flowers are a part of honoring lives lost in many cultures, whether that's placing flowers at the exact location where an atrocity occurred, or using flowers at an altar space in the home or another space that's sacred in the community, or even at the actual gravesite where you have laid someone to rest. So there's so much important symbolism around these elements of nature. So then the next step after you've invited your students to create poetry is to literally make their flowers bloom by incorporating the art making component. So we've incorporated a downloadable PDF that contains some steps to create some really awesome three-dimensional paper flowers, and I believe these are the same ones we used during our culminating event. But if that's not something that is accessible to your classroom, we do invite you to use any materials that are available in your classroom. So that might look like painting out flowers, drawing flowers, creating a floral mural, or even looking online for some directions or instructions for how to create flowers of your choice.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what level of visual artist your student is, because I am not that. And I was able to kind of do something that looked good enough, right? So just make sure that you let your students know that this isn't about them being the Picasso of their class. It is about them expressing.
Definitely, and it's about the process, right? The creative process, and how that really helps us continue to understand and have time to express some of these really heavy feelings or experiences that we've gone through.
Yeah, and because, I mean, the importance of holding that space for those students is in the times like this, and when dealing with traumatic experiences, so that they know that they're not alone. They know that they are having a shared experience, and that's how we begin to grow and blossom and bloom.
You're using those words. Bloom. I think that's really awesome. And so when we think about ways to incorporate the poetry component and the art making component, there are several ways that you can go about this. You could write the words of the poems on the petals or the leaves or the stem. You could make a ribbon or a strip of paper or even a tag where you write the lines or the actual poem and then make some type of floral arrangement. Or you could even invite your students to recite that poem out loud as they move to kind of an altar space or a sacred space within that classroom, and possibly create a living memorial where they use the flowers to honor their experience or potentially lives that had been lost. So there's a lot of ways that you can, again, immerse them in the creative process and using many expressive arts to help them further express their experiences. So I also wanted just to point out some things about the connection between trauma and art. We have to recognize that traumatic experiences are often stored in the brain as fragments, where only the visuals, the sights, the smells are things that are able to be recalled. So poetry, writing, dance, movement, music, and the visual arts is a way for individuals to kind of revisit those memories in a less threatening way, and also make some connections that really helps them to reprocess the trauma in a healthy way, where it can be held and stored and not have maybe as great an impact. So that could reduce some of those symptoms of trauma and also give them an opportunity to rewrite their narrative, which is extremely powerful when we think about these really challenging life experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a special thing when you think about that, the idea that those parts and things that we're feeling, experiencing exist in our bodies and in our spirits and our minds in fragments, but you're able to access them oftentimes through things like poetry. And so here are a couple of examples of poems that can be created from this exercise, and they're on different levels, so whether you're teaching younger students or older students, there's something there for you. So the first one is, I hear birds, I see cars, basketball courts, a park, I see trees, I see houses. Now, this poem immediately doesn't really go into the ideas of gun violence, but it is about what this young person is experiencing and the connections that he's making with the ideas and the thoughts and his emotions. And so even though he or she wasn't extremely expressive and utilizing a bunch of metaphors and similes, it was connected to who this young student is, right? And so this next poem is from an older student. So we're cool with this concoction of babies, bullets, and books, blood-dripped desks, chalkboards, miniature chalk outlines on floors. We must be, because we just send the most precious of us to potential slaughter. Sons and daughters calculating distance by listening to the rate of successive gunshots times the time it takes for a classmate's body to drop. I guess that's learning. And so that poem is actually directly connected to the ideas of gun violence. And you see how that is impacting and them expressing what it feels like and seems like to be sitting in the classroom and having to deal with everything that comes with a classroom shooting or drills or whatever it is.
Definitely. I really appreciate how you shared these two examples. I think they really help you all as teachers understand the whole range of experiences that a student might have with this activity. It also highlights this aspect of creative emotional risk-taking. So our younger student didn't get deep into their emotions, but this could also be related to some of those fragments. Maybe those are things they heard at the time of an atrocity or places where they saw some type of community violence. And so it really does match their developmental stage and where they're at right now. And the older student's poem, goes a bit deeper with more expressive language and again, matches where they're at and honors their experiences.
Right, absolutely. And it's important to note, again, like Deanna said, the range of expression that happens, right? Because there's a range of experiences and then there'll be a range of expression. And so it's important to make sure that your students know it isn't about creating the most amazing poem ever. It is about them just taking the time to connect to what they're feeling and what they've experienced, and to put it down and see what comes of that.
Definitely. So teachers were really excited to present this activity. I know that it holds a really special place in our hearts, and we know that this is something that our students can really benefit from just because this is affecting many of our lives. So we encourage you to adapt this activity as needed, depending on the age of your students, the grades you teach, and also the needs of your students. So we encourage you to use this as you see fit, and remember to take it slow, to be open to those dialogues and conversations that might arise. And if at any time things get too heavy for your students, you can ask them to pause. You can return back to some of those grounding exercise, play some calming, soothing music, let them close their eyes, maybe use that guided visualization just to kind of return them to a regulated state before you continue the process.
And ultimately, it's about allowing your students a space and opportunity to be themselves, to be honest, to know that they are in a safe space, in a communal healing space that is fertile ground for allowing their words to bloom.